Hello everybody, welcome back. Alan Robson with you, of course, on the Grisly Trail, and we've come here. I don't know whether you recognise it. If you look across that way, you'll see where the old Townley Arms used to be in Rowlands, Gill, which was a big centre for weddings and marriages and christenings and essentially getting drunk and falling over a lot. It's now a chippy and a bit of a club and what have you, and a big campsite down here. We're in Rowlands, Gill, of course, and an amazing landscape. If you look, you've got the tower at the far end, stately homes. This is just a beautiful part of the country, and yet it's got one of the least known grisly stories that you really should know about. We sing Rule Britannia, Britons never, never, never shall be slaves. And of course we have been to pretty much every country around us. We've had French kings, German kings, but for a long time we had Viking rule in this part of the world. And it's about Vikings that I'm telling you this story. Please don't be put off by the stupid hat. I just love it. It's a bit of Peaky Blinders, it's a bit of steampunk, but enjoy the giggle with it. However, what's the story? The story is a great one. Now, if you go down to Swalwell, there's a marina there, small marina, and it was one of the first places on the River Tyne where Viking longships sailed up the river from North and South Shields, sailed right the way up to get in there as far as they possibly could, to get inland so they could rape and pillage and steal from all of the small villages. And they came up regularly there. Now, on occasions, Viking warriors would meet northern wenches, fall in love, marry them, and they started to settle in Britain. Hence, York becoming the capital of Viking England. But in the early days, it was considered a traitorous thing to do for a Viking to leave his homeland in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway. It was traitorous for them to come to a place like this because essentially you were joining the enemy in the early days. They weren't even sure themselves that they were going to conquer the land, as they did. The Vikings had a leader called Haga. He was very vicious, very unpleasant. And during one of Haga's longships pillaging the Tyne and Gateshead, Bladen, when they were small settlements, there was a man called Breda who fell in love with a woman here and decided he was going to get off the ship with his son because his previous wife had died. He got off the ship with his son and decided to settle. Now, like any great hero, he was renowned for the throwing axe. And he was apparently a dead shot with this axe. He could bring down a stag, he could kill a man. He was built like a brick toilet. His name was Breda. And he got used to living here, and the people around him took to him, liked him, supported him, helped him. And one day he was out looking for food for his family when a longship came up the River Tyne. And it was another of Haga's longships, which was the same people essentially that Breda came from. They recognised a small child and they followed the child home, and he led them all the way up the valley to roughly the field on the far side there underneath the tower. That is where Breda had built his home. And it was a wilderness. There wasn't a campsite here then. There wasn't open fields. It was all woodland. And in the middle of that woodland, Breda had built a home for himself and his wife. Well, on getting to the homestead where the child showed where the house was, which little country cottage they'd built. And again, back then it was round houses. When they saw that that was the house, they got hold of the child, held him down and disemboweled him, ripped out his innards in front of his mother, and then grabbed hold of the mother and tied her to a tree because they were setting a trap for Breda when he came back. They were going to punish him for being traitorous to the Vikings. And again, at the time, there was a famous saying, beware the men of the north, because they were considered wild and crazy, and you couldn't fight them. They were vicious and violent, and disemboweling a child, it kind of shows you the level that they were on. And they'd set a trap down there where Breda lived, waiting for him to come home. The thing was, somebody tipped Breda off that there were Vikings about, because they'd seen the longship on the Tyne, and it was only guarded by half a dozen people. So Breda, very, very keen to protect his family, decided that he and any men that he had with him that were just locals, people from Rowlands, Gill and surrounds, they were going to go onto the ship and kill the Vikings. Breda went on, had a heads off before you could say spit. The other guys helped him. The ship was sunk where it stood. There was nowhere for the Vikings to go. Then Breda started running. Now he had to run a good mile or two to get up from the river to his place in the woods. And when he got there, he saw his wife in the distance, and she was tied to the tree. Now, most men would instantly have ran straight into the opening to try and rescue his wife, but Breda knew how the Vikings operated. So, knowing that the Vikings were very, very keen on trapping people, especially those that they had a grudge against, he knew that there would be Vikings around. So instead of running straight towards his wife, he went round tree by tree, slitting her throat, a dagger in the back, a quick axe. And apparently in one case, a man came running at him, and instead of hitting him with the axe overhead, he swung it beneath, hitting them between the legs, almost cleaving the man in two. This was a serious warrior. So there he was, working his way around until there was only 3 Viking warriors left, and one was the leader of the group, sent by Hagar to come and pillage. But having spotted Beda's son, knew that he had to come after him, and he wanted to take Beda's body back to his leader to show him just what a great warrior he was, because Beda was a Rambo of his day. So there was 3 men left. His wife was still tied to the tree. They all came at him, and he was swinging his axe, the 2-handed axe, over his head, and he ended up just with 1 man left, the Viking leader, spitting bile at him. Beda came and took the sword from his hand, breaking his hand in the process, and held the Viking leader on his knee and pushed the Viking back onto his knee until his back was broken. The Viking leader was still alive, still shouting and cursing at him. So Beda put his hand on his throat and tore out his windpipe. Now what that actually did was not only confirm to the people hereabouts that Vikings were good people, that they could live alongside people who already existed here, the northerner, I suppose within the banks of the River Tyne, classed as Geordies of the day, they could get on with them, and that they could trust them, because had it not been for Beda, that Viking longship and all of the men on board would have raped, pillaged and murdered and massacred quite often up and down the River Tyne. And yet, from that day on, no Viking longship ever came back to the Swalwell Marina. And it was all down to Beda. This should not be called Rowlands Gill. It should be called Beda's Gill. And if so, they should have a monument to this guy and a picture of a Viking with a long axe. And how many tourists would that bring? But instead, they got a little wheel. Hey-ho, that's history for you. But what an amazing grisly tale. And if you want some more, of course, Grisly Tales of Northumbria is kicking. And we're sharing just some of those stories with you on this night of nights.